afternoon, as it's going to be a long afternoon, as we want this summit to be as productive as possible. Just in the afternoon, I have the privilege and the honor to have Steve MacFeely here with me. It's really, for me, a deep gratitude, because I know how hard Steve's agenda is. Formerly Director of Health Data and Analytics, WHO, currently Chief Statistician in OECD, but Steve's agenda is a nightmare. And I'm very thankful, Steve, because I know what you've traveled for you to take time to be here in person with us. It's really great. And without further ado, I think the floor is totally yours. And we are having, after your presentation, a few minutes for Q&As, and then we start the following session. The floor is yours, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was delighted to be asked, because myself and Paul have worked together for a number of years. I was even happier when I saw the title that he asked me to speak about, because I just recently published a blog on this topic, so it made my life so much easier than having to come up with something new. So, as Paul mentioned, before joining the OECD, I was the chief statistician at the WHO. I was there during the pandemic when we set up a new kind of a crisis analytics unit where we really focused on excess mortality, and that was our main challenge at the time. But I had to deal with the whole range of issues. Today, I'm going to talk I'm probably straying a bit from what you've been talking about for most of the day. This is a broader topic about the use of words and how maybe I think we're becoming a little bit careless in the choice of words that we're using when we talk about data. So, if I can go to the next slide. Sorry, I have the clicker. I have the power. So when I joined the Irish Statistics Office back in the early 90s, it was made very clear to all of us that would inform decision makings, and it was clear that we were part of a longer value chain, that we were producing data, statistics that would be handed over to policymakers, but they would have to make decisions using those information, but also using other information. We were not the single source that the decisions were based on. And it was very clear that that was part of a democratic process, and ultimately the decision was theirs. We were just there to fuel the information. What we've noticed in recent years, and in fact this is why myself and a colleague wrote the blog, was that we've seen a subtle change in language, and we don't really hear about evidence-based or evidence-informed much anymore. What we hear all the time now is about data-driven decisions. And we were curious about what that means and what are the implications for that change in language. Now, to us, data-driven could mean one of two things. It could mean the first, which is data-triggered, which isn't too far removed from evidence-informed. It basically means you're producing data, and that data triggers a policy decision. But the other possible choice that it means is data-determined, which is when the data themselves are making the decision. And what we're really talking about here is algorithmic decision-making. And it's not always clear to us when people talk about data-driven which they're referring to, but increasingly, when we take the tone of articles, when we take the tone of kind of institutional documents, they seem to be suggesting more and more this algorithmic decision-making. Now, that's fine. And I use this quote over and over again because I just think it's great. Algorithms have many benefits, but they do have some downsides that we need to think about if we're using it for decision making. The first, because they're feeding off historic data sets, they will always reinforce and amplify bias and stereotypes if those bias and stereotypes exist in the data. And almost inevitably they do. We see this in particular in terms of race and in terms of gender. We see very much a reinforcing of stereotypes. So it tends to perpetuate prejudice and errors. And this is no fault of an algorithm, this is just what it does. It's taking existing data, existing patterns, and just using them. The danger of that, though, is that it may hard code discriminatory decisions into our decision-making process. So if we're using algorithms in the court system, if we're using algorithms for health insurance, what it's doing is it's taking historic biases and it's now hard coding them or hardwiring them into the decision-making. And the biggest risk is really that those decisions are becoming less apparent. When you're in a court system or when you're dealing with another human, you can challenge the decision. It's also obvious that a decision has been made about you. But as we switch more and more to algorithmic decision making, it's not clear how transparent those decisions are. In fact, it's not clear that decisions have been made about us at all. But behind the scenes today, either by algorithms made on historic data patterns. Now the question is, why does that matter? Who cares? Well, to a statistician, or at least official statisticians, we have an informal constitution which are known as the UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics. And Principle 1 says that official statistics are an indispensable element in the information system of a democratic society. So there's two very important elements here. We're an element, so again it's back to this idea that we're informing but we're not the full value chain. And we're intrinsic to democracy, to this idea that government policymakers are making decisions. So we're serving government, but we're also serving the public. And again, this is back to the idea of transparency and back to the idea that data are a public good, which I'll come back to in my closing remarks. So basically, we're emphasizing a lot. We see the citizens' entitlement to public information. And as I said, I'll return to that in a moment. Where I work now with the OECD, our recommendations on Council for Good Statistical Practice, we essentially say something very similar. We say that statistics are an indispensable tool for good quality analysis, transparency, and the functioning of democracies. And this is really the point I'm coming to, that as we switch from evidence-informed to algorithmic decision-making, we may have a challenge to our democratic systems. And in fact, if any of you have read the book recently by Kissinger and others on the impact of AI, one of the questions they ask now is, can artificial intelligence coexist with democracy? And they're coming at it from a different angle to us, but not too dissimilar. And this is one of the things that I don't think that we're thinking enough about as things are changing. So a key message in this talk really is, before we get into the health space, is official statistics are produced to inform decisions, not to make them. And this is a critical difference. We're there to produce or to support democracy, but not to replace it. And this is really the bit I want you to think about, because this is what's happening behind the scenes, or potentially happening behind the scenes with the modern tech information systems. So what are the implications for health then? Well, healthcare systems rely critically on data. I mean, the healthcare sector, just like any other sector now, is digitizing. All of the systems that you're using are reliant on data. So one of the issues here is who's governing this data, who's managing the data. And what we see is the paucity of data governance internationally. We're seeing a very, very fragmented system globally. There's different governance systems either being introduced or not introduced at all. So in the literature, you'll often hear about the three-dragon model, which is in the US where they prioritize private industry, in Europe where we prioritize the individual, and in Asia where they prioritize the state. And it's not clear how those three ideologies can coexist. And again, this really matters because now we're starting to exchange data all of the time. we're exchanging data deliberately, but we're also exchanging data almost by accident, because as data centers are built and geolocated around the world, they're now optimizing management flow systems, which really have nothing to do about where the data belongs. It's moving data to minimize the burden on the exchange. So our data are moving across data centers all of the time, and it's really not been managed particularly well. One of the other things I think is important to think about is when we talk about this data-driven, it sounds very scientific, it sounds very modern, it's very cool. One of the things I think it may be implicitly doing is over-promising. I think we're trying to remove or trying to impose a sense of certainty that doesn't exist. As statisticians, at least, I think we should always embrace uncertainty. It's always there. It's actually increasing because of the different types of data that we're using. And attached to this, this notion of algorithmic use is the notion that correlation is enough. So the end of science in a way. So I think implicitly what's going on in the data world is actually discrediting the scientific process, and that's really, really risky, because it's challenging the whole idea of what knowledge actually means. So now, instead of stating your hypothesis before the test and then testing it, we're then testing the hypothesis on the data that helped us to construct the hypothesis in the first place. And that's a breach of fundamental science. But this is what we're doing. And this is really, really risky. From an artificial intelligence point of view, I mean, what we see is enormous potential in the health sector and every other sector. But I think we must retain human oversight. So we must move, I think, from AI to IA, which is basically intelligence augmentation. But we need to be careful all the time about the data quality that's been used in our AI systems. We need to make sure that data sets are being updated, because a lot of the models have been trained on historic data and that those training sets haven't been updated. We also need to make sure, and this is back to the point I made at the start about the public good, that our models have access to data, because what we're also seeing internationally is, despite the increasing volume of data being produced, the amount of data that are actually publicly accessible is actually reducing. A lot of data are disappearing behind paywalls or just disappearing completely. Stephen Bellhurst in the New York University a couple of years ago he asked this question, are we heading to a data winter? At the time when he posed the question, he was really concerned about technology companies withdrawing data because they're now understanding the value of the asset that they hold. But in recent years, unfortunately, what we're now seeing state actors starting to withdraw public data and actually dismantle public data in some countries. And our fear is that there may be a risk of contagion attached to this. If those data disappear, then AI faces, it's not just a crisis of democracy, but it's a crisis for artificial intelligence itself, because those data will no longer be available to train models. And finally on AI, this morning I was over at the Office of National Statistics, just a couple of miles away, and we were discussing the use of artificial intelligence in official statistics. And the question that a lot of official statistics offices are facing, and I think a lot of the health sector should be thinking about this too, is what does it do for trust? What does it do for trust now, and what will it do in the future? If we produce a statistic that uses artificial intelligence, probably nobody cares until that statistic is challenged. And then what's not clear is in the court of public opinion, what happens then? So for example, we were talking about price indices this morning. If you can say to the public that your price indices were compiled by people who actually physically go into shops, they see the prices that are faced by you as a consumer, that's probably very reassuring to a lot of people. It's not that that statistic is any better than information that more reassuring. But the question is, in 10 years' time, will that still be the case? Because maybe people who've come up in the digital age and are digitally native, in a few years' time, they may be saying, well, why did you go to the shop? Why didn't you use artificial intelligence? It's so inefficient what you're doing. So I think we're in this transition from kind of the analog world to the digital world. And as people who are producing statistics, we need to be careful about that we don't run too far ahead of our public. We need to modernize, we need to transition, but we need to do it in a way that we don't leave our public behind. Because if we move too fast, we may actually break the social contract that actually makes our data useful. But eventually, if we're too slow, if we don't move in time, the digitally native people are going to get frustrated with us because they think that we're just Luddites. So it's a delicate transition that we're going through. So this probably was very irrelevant to what you've been talking about for most of the day, but I hope it gives you some food for thought. And just to let you know, this is what some of the statisticians around the world are thinking about. So with that, I will finish. And just a little plug, if you want any information from the OECD, we have a lot of health statistics, but we have a lot of economic and productivity statistics. You can find it all on these various platforms. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. And as we have now certain time for Q&A until the next session starts at 2, any questions from the audience here? Iñaki? Iñaki Gutierrez from Euskadi.
Yeah, well, we met yesterday.
I was hoping you'd stay quiet.
I'm Iñaki Gutierrez Ibarluce. I'm the Director of Health Innovation and Research of the Ministry for Health in the Basque region in northwest of Spain. My question, it is very food for thoughts. I think it is interesting. One of the things that you were stressing, it is the fact on artificial intelligence and intelligent augmentation. My question it is how we can bring this to the general audience and to the public, and how we can translate that things that are. I think this morning also some of the speakers were stressing that if we are analyzing trust, it's difficult to have something that is attainable to make any kind of decision. But it's how we can share that, because it seems to be that there is even among decision makers that artificial intelligence is the key factor by which we are going to solve the problems of the world. And in reality, most of the data that we are using, it is mostly trust. So it is how we are in need to build that in terms of creating trust and also sharing this with the general population and from the perspective of the OECD.
So, well, my personal view is back to this word certainty and uncertainty. There's a lot of hype at the moment around artificial intelligence, as there is with any new wave. I think a lot of us are guilty of overselling, overpromising. I think we should be a lot more circumspect. For me, the issue really is about quality. If we're certain that we can produce something of good quality, then fine. If we're not certain, then we just need to make it clear to policymakers that that's just not the case, and we have to stand firm. What was interesting, again, back to my visit at the ONS this morning, it's actually one of the first times I've seen a statistics office produce metrics where they've been using artificial intelligence, which they're satisfied is doing the job they asked it to do, and they were actually able to quantify the resource savings that it was generating, because I've seen so little evidence. I've seen a lot of hyperbole. So I think there is promise, but I think we have to start small, start where we're absolutely certain the tool is working. We've done a lot of testing at OECD on different types of AI, so we see a lot of promise in machine learning, a lot of promise in LLMs. We're using them quite a bit. On ChatGPT and GPT models, frankly, we're terrified. They basically produce garbage from a statistics point of view. They are not capable of ingesting data because of the distributional model that they use. The really scary thing is they produce very plausible looking numbers that somebody who's reasonably intelligent but isn't expert and doesn't have the time to go and validate, they'll get a number that looks quite realistic, but it's not. And worse still, the model will probably attribute that data to OECD or to the IMF, and it's not our data. So from a reputational point of view, this is something that makes us decidedly nervous. We have a project at the moment, we're working with the platforms to try and make sure that they use our data, they prioritize the official statistics. One of the lessons we've learned from that is in fact that our metadata weren't working. So we put a lot of effort in the last couple of years to making our data open. But what we hadn't understood is the metadata that we had constructed don't work for a machine-to-machine ingestion. So we're having to rebuild the entire metadata series behind our tables so that the big platforms can actually ingest our data automatically. So that's been a big shock to us. It also means for our statistical quality assurance frameworks, we're having to redo them to put in a chapter explicitly on metadata, both the traditional types of metadata, but now also the metadata that's required by large language models, which is different. So what I would say is hold firm. Don't oversell, don't overpromise, and don't give in on the idea that the world is certain. Policymakers love certainty. The public loves certainty. I mean, we saw it during COVID. People wanted answers. And I guess this is maybe the other issue that we need to be aware of. I think there's a kind of a cyclical path which is between what we might call normal and crisis. During a crisis, people's tolerance basically reduces. They don't care about data governance, they don't care about privacy, they don't care about anything that solved the problem. As soon as the crisis passes, then kind of the normal standards resume. So we have to understand as well when we're talking to people, where are we on the kind of crisis cycle? Because what we say in normal times may not be satisfactory during a crisis and vice versa.
So much. We have still a few minutes before Steve. Oh, lots of questions, and I still have my own questions. So, beg your pardon if we could start the session after a little bit late, but we'll compensate.
Thank you. I've got quite a simple question. Hi, I'm Louisa. I used to work at ONS, but now I'm at Public Health Wales. My question is, I wondered if there was anything you were able to share with us that could help us do something similar.
Sorry, I didn't catch the actual question.
Maybe I'll just speak louder. I was really interested in your comment about the metadata and having to change the metadata to work for the AI platforms scraping that. I wondered if you had anything that you could share with us on that so that we could look at the same issue.
Yeah, we're actually working on this at the moment. So in fact, when I leave tomorrow, I'm going to Rome to the SDMX conference. So SDMX is the data exchange model that statisticians use. It's not dissimilar to DDI. It's slightly different, but not dissimilar now to what Google are using for data commons. But SDMX is the exchange model that we use. And in fact, in SDMX, the whole point of that was to get the metadata right. So we've constructed new standards, so we can. They're readily available, but and if you want to contact us, we can give you the exchange metadata that we're using.
Thank you, Steve. Wondered if, as part of your ONS work, you've got any reflections on what we're going to do about the poisoning of data sources by AI, and in the context at a much more micro level. We're not only seeing the AI perpetuating error, but over time introducing new error when the AI trains on data that AI has already touched. So how would we consider identification of poison data sources, how we filter those out, how we work around them?
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is the snake eating its own tail. And this will accelerate if the data governance don't set in and protect some of the data that really need to be public. The generation of synthetic data, in theory, is a good thing, but in fact, because it's built on the historic data, it's just further perpetuating the patterns that existed in the past, and it's not incorporating the new trends. I don't think there's anything we can do additional. I mean, I think it's the same risk, only worse. It's just accelerated. It's just exacerbated. So, at the international level, we're really fighting, perhaps a lost cause, but we are really trying to fight for an international data governance agreement to try and identify. So there's two things we're trying to do. One is identify data sets that should be protected as a public good. This might be some health data, but in particular, a classic example would be meteorological information. You may have seen in the US, a lot of the NOAA data sets have disappeared. That's fatal not just for the US. I mean, in time, that's going to be a disaster for them, but it's going to be a disaster for everybody else, because the global meteorological system feeds off everybody's model. I mean, Europe needs data from the US, Asia needs data from us. So as those data disappear, it causes a crisis everywhere. So there's some data need to be protected as global public data sets. But there's other data clearly have a commercial value to the owner, to the company. We have to respect that, but we have to make sure that we can still retain access. Another issue that's of concern to us is, as governments start to privatize activities that used to be a public service, whether it's health, whether it's transport, whether it's education, they're not taking data seriously. So when they sign the contracts, they're signing over everything and they're not retaining ownership or access of the data. So a lot of the administrative data that national statistical offices have access to is slowly disappearing, because it's disappearing behind a firewall, because the governments in countries didn't understand what they were signing away, and then they're having to purchase back their own data from the private sector. So these are really kind of mistakes that are happening, because I think a lot of governments have moved into the digital era but still think of infrastructure as tangible, and they haven't understood the modern digital infrastructure that's required to run a digital economy. And I think they're really struggling, and it's our job to try and help them, but it's not easy.
Everybody is looking for better healthcare solutions. What if AI could be the answer? AI in healthcare isn't just a buzzword, it's revolutionizing patient care. With AI, we can achieve more accurate diagnoses and personalized treatments tailored specifically to each patient. AI systems analyze vast amounts of medical data at lightning speed, identifying patterns that might be missed by human eyes. This means early detection of diseases, fewer errors, and more effective treatments. But the magic doesn't stop there. AI helps streamline administrative tasks, giving healthcare professionals more time to focus on what they do best, caring for patients. The result? Enhanced patient outcomes and improved quality of life. So whether it's predicting patient needs or making real-time decisions, AI is transforming healthcare, one patient at a time. Embrace the future with AI-driven healthcare solutions. Because better health outcomes start with better technology. Ready to take the leap? AI in healthcare. Better diagnoses and treatments. Making healthcare smarter, one innovation at a time.
Venture into the frontiers of healthcare data innovation with the Health Data Forum. Welcome to the Health Data Forum's YouTube channel, your gateway to thought-provoking conversations, cutting-edge insights, and groundbreaking advancements in healthcare data. Join us as we explore the transformative power of data to revolutionize healthcare delivery, patient care, and societal well-being. Embark on a journey of discovery. Delve into healthcare data through our informative videos, featuring leading experts, thought leaders, and innovators. Discover how our global movement, Data First, AI Later, is building a strong foundation for ethical and impactful healthcare solutions. Experience the collaborative spirit. Be a part of our vibrant community of health data enthusiasts, where ideas converge, partnerships flourish, and innovation takes center stage. Participate in discussions, share your perspectives, and join us in shaping the future of data-driven healthcare. Stay informed about the latest developments in healthcare data through our comprehensive video library. Catch up on insightful interviews, thought-provoking presentations, and engaging discussions about the role of data as the backbone of healthcare transformation. Join us in shaping the future of healthcare. Let's harness the power of data to transform healthcare for the better. Subscribe to our channel today and become part of the Health Data Forum's mission and our Data First, AI Later initiative to make healthcare data work for everyone.